In the heart of Asia, two nations have forged a bond that transcends borders and reshapes the region.
ladies and gentlemen. All the technical sessions have been successfully concluded, and the participants are, now on the way to join us for the panel discussion. So we will be waiting for 5 to 6 minutes, then we will start our discussion.
In the heart of Asia, two nations have forged a bond that transcends borders and reshapes the region. For decades, China and Pakistan have been known as Iron Brothers, sharing a history of trust, cooperation, and mutual support. 10 years ago, a visionary project was conceived, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. CPEC has breathed new life into Pakistan's economy, creating more than 192,000 direct jobs, generating $17.55 billion in revenue, and adding 8,000 megawatts of electricity. Beyond its borders, CPEC has laid the foundation for a connected region, fostering cooperation, understanding, and prosperity. With renewed determination, the CPEC grew stronger, attracting a total of $25.4 billion in direct Chinese investments and transforming Pakistan's infrastructure. As we celebrate 10 years of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, let's reflect on the incredible achievements. 510 kilometers of highways, 932-kilometer roads, 8,000 megawatts of electricity, 886 kilometers of national core transmission network, along with 820-kilometer optic fiber cable and the first mass transit of Pakistan. In the heart of Asia, two nations have forged a bond that transcends borders and reshapes the region. For decades, China and Pakistan have been known as Iron Brothers, sharing a history of trust, cooperation, and mutual support. 10 years ago, a visionary project was conceived, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. CPEC has breathed new life into Pakistan's economy, creating more than 192,000 direct jobs, generating $17.55 billion in revenue, and adding 8,000 megawatts of electricity. Beyond its borders, CPEC has laid the foundation for a connected region, fostering cooperation, understanding, and prosperity. With renewed determination, the CPEC grew stronger, attracting a total of $25.4 billion in direct Chinese investments and transforming Pakistan's infrastructure. As we celebrate 10 years of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, let's reflect on the incredible achievements. 510 kilometers of highways, 932-kilometer roads, 8,000 megawatts of electricity, 886 kilometers of national core transmission network, along with 820-kilometer optic fiber cable and the first mass transit of Pakistan. In the heart of Asia, two nations have forged a bond that transcends borders and reshapes the region. For decades, China and Pakistan have been known as Iron Brothers, sharing a history of trust, cooperation, and mutual support. 10 years ago, a visionary project was conceived, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. CPEC has breathed new life into Pakistan's economy, creating more than 192,000 direct jobs, generating $17.55 billion in revenue, and adding 8,000 megawatts of electricity. Beyond its borders, CPEC has laid the foundation for a connected region, fostering cooperation, understanding, and prosperity. With renewed determination, the CPEC grew stronger, attracting a total of $25.4 billion in direct Chinese investments and transforming Pakistan's infrastructure. As we celebrate 10 years of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, let's reflect on the incredible achievements. 510 kilometers of highways, 932-kilometer roads, 8,000 megawatts of electricity, 886 kilometers of national core transmission network, along with 820-kilometer optic fiber cable and the first mass transit of Pakistan. In the heart of Asia, two nations have forged a bond that transcends borders and reshapes the region. For decades, China and Pakistan have been known as Iron Brothers, sharing a history of trust, cooperation, and mutual support. 10 years ago, a visionary project was conceived, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. CPEC has breathed new life into Pakistan's economy, creating more than 192,000 direct jobs, generating $17.55 billion in revenue, and adding 8,000 megawatts of electricity. Beyond its borders, CPEC has laid the foundation for a connected region, fostering cooperation, understanding, and prosperity. With renewed determination, the CPEC grew stronger, attracting a total of $25.4 billion in direct Chinese investments and transforming Pakistan's infrastructure. As we celebrate 10 years of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, let's reflect on the incredible achievements. 510 kilometers of highways, 932-kilometer roads, 8,000 megawatts of electricity, 886 kilometers of national core transmission network, along with 820-kilometer optic fiber cable and the first mass transit of Pakistan. In the heart of Asia, two nations have forged a bond that transcends borders and reshapes the region. For decades, China and Pakistan have been known as Iron Brothers, sharing a history of trust, cooperation, and mutual support. 10 years ago, a visionary project was conceived, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. CPEC has breathed new life into Pakistan's economy, creating more than 192,000 direct jobs, generating $17.55 billion in revenue, and adding 8,000 megawatts of electricity. Beyond its borders, CPEC has laid the foundation for a connected region, fostering cooperation, understanding, and prosperity. With renewed determination, the CPEC grew stronger, attracting a total of $25.4 billion in direct Chinese investments and transforming Pakistan's infrastructure. As we celebrate 10 years of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, let's reflect on the incredible achievements. 510 kilometers of highways, 932-kilometer roads, 8,000 megawatts of electricity, 886 kilometers of national core transmission network, along with 820-kilometer optic fiber cable and the first mass transit of Pakistan. In the heart of Asia, two nations have forged a bond that transcends borders and reshapes the region. For decades, China and Pakistan have been known as Iron Brothers, sharing a history of trust, cooperation, and mutual support. 10 years ago, a visionary project was conceived, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. CPEC has breathed new life into Pakistan's economy, creating more than 192,000 direct jobs, generating $17.55 billion in revenue, and adding 8,000 megawatts of electricity. Beyond its borders, CPEC has laid the foundation for a connected region, fostering cooperation, understanding, and prosperity. With renewed determination, the CPEC grew stronger, attracting a total of $25.4 billion in direct Chinese investments and transforming Pakistan's infrastructure. As we celebrate 10 years of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, let's reflect on the incredible achievements. 510 kilometers of highways, 932-kilometer roads, 8,000 megawatts of electricity, 886 kilometers of national core transmission network, along with 820-kilometer optic fiber cable and the first mass transit of Pakistan. In the heart of Asia, two nations have forged a bond that transcends borders and reshapes the region. For decades, China and Pakistan have been known as Iron Brothers, sharing a history of trust, cooperation, and mutual support. 10 years ago, a visionary project was conceived, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. CPEC has breathed new life into Pakistan's economy, creating more than 192,000 direct jobs, generating $17.55 billion in revenue, and adding 8,000 megawatts of electricity. Beyond its borders, CPEC has laid the foundation for a connected region, fostering cooperation, understanding, and prosperity. With renewed determination, the CPEC grew stronger, attracting a total of $25.4 billion in direct Chinese investments and transforming Pakistan's infrastructure. As we celebrate 10 years of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, let's reflect on the incredible achievements. 510 kilometers of highways, 932 kilometer roads, 8,000 megawatts of electricity, 886 kilometers of national core transmission network, along with 820 kilometer optic fiber cable and the first mass transit of Pakistan. In the heart of Asia, two nations have forged a bond that transcends borders and reshapes the region. For decades, China and Pakistan have been known as Iron Brothers, sharing a history of trust, cooperation, and mutual support. 10 years ago, a visionary project was conceived, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. CPEC has breathed new life into Pakistan's economy, creating more than 192,000 direct jobs, generating $17.55 billion in revenue, and adding 8,000 megawatts of electricity. Beyond its borders, CPEC has laid the foundation for a connected region, fostering cooperation, understanding, and prosperity. With renewed determination, the CPEC grew stronger, attracting a total of $25.4 billion in direct Chinese investments and transforming Pakistan's infrastructure. As we celebrate 10 years of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, let's reflect on the incredible achievements. 510 kilometers of highways, 932 kilometer roads, 8,000 megawatts of electricity, 886 kilometers of national core transmission network, along with 820 kilometer optic fiber cable.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to have your attention as we are going to start our panel discussion. So please have your seats.
In the heart of Asia, two nations have forged a bond that transcends
Distinguished guests,
and reshapes the region.
esteemed delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you all to this second panel discussion, Expansion of Industrial Base and Integration with Global Value Chain. I am Jamshed Ahmed, working as Investment and Industrial Specialist at CPEC Secretariat, Ministry of Planning, Development and Special Initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to share a basic background of this theme. It is pertinent to assess the critical role that industrial cooperation under CPEC framework can play in Pakistan's economy, fostering innovation and driving progress. Over the years, the world has witnessed unprecedented globalization, with economies becoming increasingly interdependent through complex networks of production and trade. Integration into global value chain is an essential driver of industrialization, where production is fragmented across borders. With different countries specializing in specific stages of manufacturing process, this integration has presented immense opportunities for countries to harness their unique strength and resources. Ladies and gentlemen, in the second phase, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor fundamentally envisages to not only expand the manufacturing base and enhance competitiveness, but integrate Pakistan with the global value chain. Special economic zones under CPEC are aimed at promoting industrial growth by attracting foreign direct investment and relocation of industries. These SEZs offer numerous incentives, tax breaks, streamlined procedures, and infrastructure support to attract businesses. Ladies and gentlemen, now I would like to introduce and welcome on stage the esteemed panelists and chair for an insightful and thought-provoking discussions. At the outset, I would request the chair and moderator, Dr. Nadeem Haque, Vice Chancellor of my alma mater, Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. Please, Dr. Nadeem. Now I would like to share that our first panelist is Dr. Tao Yitao, who has joined us virtually from China. She is a professor and PhD supervisor at Shenzhen University. Professor Tao currently serving as Director of the China Center for Special Economic Zone Research at Shenzhen University. Next we have with us Mr. Asim Saeed, serving as Member Private Sector at Planning Commission of Pakistan. His strategic and innovative approaches have been instrumental in creating an enabling environment for private sector businesses to thrive and contribute toward economic development. Sir Asim, please. Next, I would request Mr. Umair Rafiq, who is Director of Operations of Rafiq Engineering Industries, manufacturers of home appliances under the brand Royal, and one of the Pakistan's top exporter of electric fans, and chairman of Pakistan Electric Fan Manufacturing Association, Mr. Umair Rafiq. We have with us Mr. Zafarul Hassan, who is working as Joint Chief Economist Economic Policy at Planning Commission of Pakistan. He has been driving force in shaping the Pakistan's economic agenda and sustainable growth strategies. Mr. Zafarul Hassan. Last, we have with us Dr. Irfa Iqbal. She is civil servant for last 25 years, currently Commissioner Inland Revenue Services, former Commercial Councillor Beijing and Berlin. She has also been remains Chief Executive Officer, Punjab Board of Investment and Special Economic Zone Authority, Punjab. Dr. Irfa Iqbal. So, without further delay, I would request Dr. Nadeem Haque to proceed with the discussions. Over to you, sir. Thank you. Online.
Well, thank you very much, folks. First of all, let me begin by congratulating the organizers of this event. I think it's a very successful, very well done event. Diverse topics, I attended a few sessions, and I must say the technical sessions, I attended 4 or 5 of them, they're very good. And now we've got this panel discussion program tomorrow, looks very interesting. The second point that I'd like to make is CPEC is certainly, it's been 10 years, and we're very proud of CPEC, very proud of the fact that CPEC has helped Pakistan, and we're learning from China, and our relationship with China, as all Pakistanis know, is absolutely one of the best relationships that there is in any international political situation. So with that, I think we should salute CPEC, and we should be all very grateful to this enormously successful project that is now moving toward its second stage, and I think the second stage we will look forward to much greater and deeper integration with China. So with that, let me begin this very interesting topic of expansion of the manufacturing base and integration with global value chain. So let me begin with Professor Yitao, who's sitting in China. I presume you can hear us, Professor Yitao. Can you hear us? You can hear us, Professor?
Yeah.
Thank you. Professor, I'd like you to begin the session, since you are sitting in China and you are working in the Chinese, in the Shenzhen University, a very important university in the world. Can you please describe to us the Chinese experience? China has done exceedingly well. I mean, I don't need to comment on that. Everybody knows that. China has not only integrated into the global value chains, but also redefining global value chains. And China's current account reserve position in the current account surplus are legendary. Don't think any country has achieved that. So could you tell us how you were able to do that And what kind of lessons can we draw from you in terms of Pakistan?
Hello, everyone. 我今天演讲的题目是从中巴经济走廊看中巴经济的互补性。中巴两国是相互需要、彼此成就的区域命运共同体。70多年来，虽然经历风风雨雨，但是两个世界人口大国呢，还是成为了让许多周边国家羡慕并感到压力的铁杆兄弟。国家繁荣、民生幸福是我们共同追求的美好目标，所以作为相互需要的友好邻国，是创造惠及彼此的利益与获得利益的机会，而不是利益本身，使中巴两国成为相互信任的朋友。
Recording in progress.
中巴经济具有相当程度上的来自于地缘因素的相互依赖性和互补性，这种依存性与互补性在中巴经济走廊的建设中，以地缘优势加上资本与技术实力的相互结合的方式，完美的展现了出来。如果说瓜达尔港的独特的地理位置使中巴经济走廊无论对中国还是巴基斯坦乃至中东、中亚、南亚、非洲，中东具有独特的价值，那么中国的资本与技术的投入，
那他说我们没有，
怎么的？
他说我们没有那个共享全屏，
怎么会啊？重新来。有些问题了。
Professor Yitao, have we lost you? Are you still there? Professor Yitao, we can't hear you. Hello? Sorry, go ahead, please. We can't hear you. Go ahead.
怎么回事？Hello, everyone. 好，中巴两国是相互需要、彼此成就的区域命运共同体。70多年来，虽然经历了风风雨雨，但两个世界人口大国还是成为了让许多周边国家羡慕并感到压力的铁杆兄弟。国家繁荣、民生幸福是我们共同追求的美好目标，所以作为相互需要的友好邻国，创造惠及彼此的利益与获得利益的机会，而不是利益本身，使中巴两国成为相互信任的朋友。中巴经济具有相当程度上的来自于地缘依存性与互补性，这种依存性与互补性在中巴经济走廊的建设中，以地缘优势加上资本与技术实力相结合的方式，完美的展现了出来。如果说瓜达尔港的独特地理位置，巴经济走廊无论对中国还是对巴基斯坦乃至东亚、中亚、南亚、非洲、中东具有独特的价值，那么中国的资本与技术的投入将使中巴经济走廊具有可持续发展的重要的保障与活力。瓜达尔港呢，我们知道具有特殊而重要的地理位置，东距卡拉奇呢460公里，西距巴基斯坦伊朗边境120公里，南临印度洋的阿拉伯海，位于霍尔木兹 湾的湾口处，距全国石油运输主要的通道霍尔木兹海峡不到400公里。它既是东亚国家转口贸易及中亚内陆国家出海口，又可以直接辐射到南亚、中东和非洲。那么，中国有大约60%的能源补给来自于中东，大约有80%的石油进口经过马六甲海峡。然而，随着瓜达尔港的建成并投入使用，意味着一个足以改变世界能源运输格局的重要的能源转口贸易中心和商贸物流中心的形成，中国将成为最大的受益国。那么，中巴经济走廊建设将会为瓜达尔港乃至巴基斯坦带来巨大的经济发展的机会与动力，其良性发展所产生的辐射效应与传导效应，也将会使巴基斯坦经济发生整体的改变。比如，中巴经济走廊的建设不仅可以使巴基斯坦凭借劳动力要素低廉的优势承接中国的产业梯度转移的链条，而且还会随着两国经济往来的增加，相关联的高端产业业态，如信息、数字经济、金融等现代服务业也将会同步得到发展。所以呢，在这一过程当中发生的不仅仅是单纯的产业梯度转移与承接，还有对巴基斯坦自身产业升级的带动和获得跨越式发展的要素禀赋的机会与可能。中巴经济走廊的重要意义呢，在于通过形成的产业链条的传导机制与扩散效应，带动区域经济的协同发展，在保障生产要素低成本、跨区域流动的同时，保证利益相关国的能源安全。
我念您念一遍，然后我给英文再念一遍。
好，那你说吧。
The significance of the China-Pakistan economic corridor depends on the transmission mechanism and the diffusion effect of the industrial chain formed to drive the synergic development of the trans-regional economy and ensure the energy security of the interested countries while guarantee the low-cost trans-regional flow of production factors.
在跨区域经济协同发展中呢，产业链条的传导机制与扩散效应部分取决于产业业态的自身逻辑，也就是某种产业业态自身上下游产业链的延伸程度，但区域投资环境的安全程度也是至关重要的，因为规避风险是资本的最基本的属性。
The process of trans-regional economic development, the transmission mechanism, and the effect of the industrial chain partly depends on the logic of the industrial format itself, and it is the degree of extension of the upstream and downstream industrial chain of certain industrial formats. But the security degree of the regional investment environment is also critical because risk aversion is the most basic property of capital.
另外，在遵循市场规律同时，政府有效配置稀缺资源的能力和力度，一个社会的思想的解放与观念更新的程度，也会在相当程度上影响乃至制约社会经济的发展。
In addition, while following the laws of the market, the ability and the strength of government to effectively allocate resources and the degree of and the renewal of idea in society will also affect and even continue socio-economic development to considerable extent.
因为经济发展从来都不仅仅是经济本身的问题，而是一个社会变革的结果。
For economic development is never just about economic itself, but the result of social change.
从中巴经济走廊的建设角度来看，中国经济越强大，惠及周边区域的邻里效应和扩散效应就越强。另外一方面，巴基斯坦投资环境越好，这种邻里效应与扩散效应的承接度也就越强。
From the perspective of the role of CPEC construction, the stronger the Chinese knock is, the stronger the neighborhood effect and the diffusion effect should benefit the surrounding regions. On the other hand, the better the investment environment in Pakistan, the stronger acceptance of this neighborhood effect and diffusion effect.
42年前，中国深圳呢成功的利用了香港产业梯度转移过来的劳动密集型产业，完成了最初的资本原始积累。今天的巴基斯坦也可以充分利用好中国产业梯度转移过来的劳动密集型产业，解决迫在眉睫的社会就业问题。
42 years ago, Shenzhen successfully utilized the labor incentive industrial transfer from the industrial in Hong Kong and complete the initial accumulation of capital. Nowadays, Pakistan can also make full use of labor incentive industries transfer from the industrial in China to solve the problem of social employment.
又可以通过出口加工的发展，以出口替代模式加快本国的工业化进程，增加外汇收入，提高人们生活水平。中巴经济走廊应该成为中巴基斯坦经济的增长极。
In addition, through the development of export processing industry, the industrialization process of country can be allocated by the mode of export substitution. Foreign exchange income can be increased and people's living standards can be improved. The CPEC should become the economic growth scale of Pakistan.
在中巴经济走廊建设中，中国应该关注资本的使用效率，提高资本与技术的投入产出比，遵循效益最大化的市场原则。
In the construction of the CPEC, China should pay particular attention to the efficiency of capital use, improve the input-output ratio of capital and technology, and follow the market principle of maximizing benefits.
中国应该充分发挥民营资本在非基础建设领域中的独特优势。中巴经济走廊建设与发展一定是经济规律主导下的市场经济发展与完善的结果，最终应该是中巴两国共同收获市场经济的繁荣。
China should fully utilize the unique advantage of private capital in non-infrastructure construction. The construction and development of the CPEC must be the result of the development and improvement of the market economy under the guidance of economic law. China and Pakistan should jointly harvest the prosperity of the market economy.
中巴国家强大，民生幸福是中巴两国人民的共同愿望。中巴经济走廊将成为实现这一美好愿望的桥梁与纽带。
A strong country and a happy people's livelihood are the common aspiration of peoples in China and Pakistan, and the China-Pakistan economic corridor will become a bridge and a link to realize this aspiration.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Yitao. Do you have somebody to translate a little bit for us, tell us something, or Zamir Saab, will you come and do this? Acha? So you people are happy with that? Okay, very good. Very good. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Then Asim Saab, you go ahead and tell us what you think of the situation.
I thought about the question which was posed, and I'll try to attempt to answer this by enunciating some of the research and analysis that we have done at the Planning Commission as well as BITE, and hopefully we can try to come up with some answers what the private sector, what the government should be doing to enable the private sector to grow in the manufacturing sector, and also to foster linkages between domestic firms and international firms. But before I do that, I would like to share my experience with my previous experience with the Citigroup, when I used to work in Southeast Asia on the investment banking platform. So I used to cover Southeast Asia from capital markets perspective. And before we would take a client out to raise funding for securities, we would do a lot of diligence. The prospectus, the information memorandum would be made, the legal diligence would be done. And once the entire package was made, we would launch the transaction. We would announce the transaction to the market, and before it was, then the pricing and the closing would take place. But before pricing, all the bank syndicates would get together and they would keep a keen eye on the economic data, be it non-farm payrolls, be it any GDP number, be it any inflation number. Because these numbers created an environment, and that environment created an opportunity which would push the credit spreads down and hopefully try to get a better deal for the client in terms of coupon. The reason I've shared this experience with you is that it is essentially the environment which creates an opportunity. And once an opportunity is created, a transaction is made. And once a transaction is made, your GDP grows. But the environment is actually created by numbers. Now, if that is the case, and if that is the trail of thought here, then what do our macroeconomic numbers look like? I'll just share some of the analysis which we had done. Our numbers, our GDP number hasn't been great lately. Our inflation numbers are close to 30%. Our policy rate is, I think, around 22%. So our overall macroeconomic numbers there's nothing to write home about. And I think part of this predicament has to do with what I'm going to share with you right now in terms of our export performance. Now, Pakistan's export performance since 2013 to at least 2021 has been range bound. It's been bouncing between $20 billion to $25 billion. It was only in 2022 that it hit around $32 billion. But essentially in the last 9-10 years, it's been range bound. Now, if we compare Pakistan to some of our regional competitors, be it in India, Vietnam, Indonesia, Bangladesh, we did a comparison of 1990 to 2001, and it was earth-shattering to see how the export numbers had actually gone up for some of the other countries. Bangladesh almost 24 times, Indonesia almost 9 times, Vietnam almost 147 times, India 30 times, and Pakistan only 4 times. This is 1990 and 2021. Export to GDP ratio, almost all the countries that I mentioned, they have gone in the right direction. Vietnam went from 36% to 93%, India went from 7% to 21%, Bangladesh from 6% to 11%, Pakistan went from almost 15% to 9%. And I think the story is the same when we look at exports to total imports, where generally the trend has been rather in the right direction for countries, but in Pakistan's case, exports as a percentage of overall imports has plummeted from 73% in 1990 to 40% in 2021. So this is, I think the numbers that I've tried to share with you provide, it's part of the overall puzzle which has led us to where we are, in the overall. Talk to them what the issues were, and amongst the top issues were their liquidity concerns. we ought to address that. I think this is well known, but it's not well executed. We have had a major issue with our raw material inputs. I think all the industry was up in arms that the import that they wanted to do in order to export. We have generally been a consumption-led economy, be that as it may, but at the end of the day, we also have to import to export, and that wasn't taking place, and the industry was up in arms. So I think that's another area that we got to be at least sensitive about. One understands that the overall macroeconomic situation is what it is, but I think at the exporter level, and if we have to give confidence to the private sector, I think these are some of the hot buttons and the pain points. Taxation policy, I think we really don't have one. It's very ad hoc, it's very revenue driven, and it is not perhaps there may be tax experts sitting here, but at least from my perspective and some of the exporters and the private sector that I've spoken to, I think it's not conducive to transactions, which would hopefully lead to enhancement in our GDP. And I think in all of this, things to do or things to be better executed, I would also like to club in, I didn't know where to club this point in, but I thought this would probably be the best place. I think we really ought to run the debt office more professionally, which is in finance. I've been saying that for a while. I think papers have also been written at some of the other institutions as well as PIDE. I think this is one area which has to be managed better if you have to come out of this predicament. And this predicament is important because it gives that environment for private sector to thrive. Now, coming down a layer, now if I look at the lay of the land of our business lay of the land, I think the elephant in the room is definitely our government footprint. Here at the Planning Commission, in collaboration with Pakistan Institute of Development Economics, we did do a study and research on it, and we defined the government footprint to consist of SOEs, their interventions, their revenues, the regulations, as well as the debt capital that the government has. And we took a couple of approaches to calculate the government footprint, and the number which was coming out to be was anywhere from mid 60% to mid 70% of the overall GDP of the country, which is massive, which is huge. Now, if almost 70% of the economy has a large government footprint, that doesn't leave much for private sector to thrive. This doesn't stop here. Actually, this has an impact on liquidity as well, which is available to the private sector. Because the government is the largest business in the country, or represents the largest business house in the country, banks tend to lean more towards the government to give them liquidity or loans, and consequently that liquidity which ought to go towards the private sector is diverted away. This is partially correct, I would say, but it does happen. But then here I would like to share another perspective which was very interesting to me. I was on a Zoom conference which was arranged by PIDE I think it was on the government footprint, and Michael Spence, who was a Nobel laureate, was the chief guest. And I asked him this question, what his view was on the government footprint. And I thought he's just going to say that he doesn't agree with it, but he gave me a very interesting answer. He said he doesn't care as long as the government entity is operated efficiently. And I think that's in hindsight, when I thought about it, it did change my perspective on things. If a government entity operates efficiently, then there is nothing wrong with it. But on the other side of the spectrum, there is also an argument that if a government entity is making money, then why isn't the private sector there? And if the government entity is not making money, then it ought not to be there. That's on the other side of the spectrum. So government footprint is a reality, and it's not easy to just say that, okay, we just get rid of that, all the entities, government entities, and be done with it. It's a reality. So what should we do? I think one thing that the government can do is perhaps look at a policy measure to push government entities to be our leading business houses in the export market. Leave the local market to the private sector. If you have the capital, if you have the know-how, if you have the resources, let's go and compete at the international level. This is one way of dealing with our SOEs who can actually compete in the international market, although most of them may not be working efficiently. And if they are not working efficiently, then obviously we have to privatize them. We have a privatization program, we have a privatization commission, but the privatization process is a cumbersome one, and it hasn't yielded us much in the last at least few years. As part of our study, we also suggested that we should enhance public-private partnership, and I think we did a commendable job here at the Planning Commission, where an authority was established or resuscitated in 2020, 2021, Public-Private Partnership Authority. And if I recall correctly, there were at least 4 transactions that we did, all in the infrastructure space, which were approved by the board, where for every $1 of public monies, we were able to raise $5 of private sector money. And that's where the strength of the public-private partnership comes. But I think our public-private partnership has been rather limited to the infrastructure space, and it ought to grow and encompass and encapsulate other sectors as well. I think here I would like to make a point here that of all the public-private partnerships that at least I've seen, at least in, we've done Sakhar Hyderabad, we also approve Karachi Circular, Sialkot Khariya, so on and so forth. But I think the biggest public-private partnership actually is of good human capital between the private sector and the public sector. And what the government can do is to nurture it and value good human capital, which unfortunately, I'm coming from the private sector and I'll go back to the private sector, but what I've seen here in 4.5 years with the government is that the appreciation and the nurturing and the value that ought to be assigned, or at least globally, what the world assigns to good human capital is not of the same caliber that is assigned here in government circles. And finally, obviously, the sludge series which PI did, the regulatory guillotine, Pakistan Regulatory Modernization Initiative. Now coming to sectors, I think the largest manufacturing sector in Pakistan is textile, which has the largest weight, at least in the large scale manufacturing. Now here at the Planning Commission, we were developing a pitch book for China to attract Chinese businesses to come and invest in Pakistan in special economic zones. So when I did that analysis of our textile value chain, I think this is a couple of years ago, maybe 2020, 2021 data. So the overall export market was around 780 billion at that time of textile. And when I looked at the export numbers from the various segments of the value chain of the textile sector, what I found out was that yarn and fabric, Pakistan had more than 7%, one was 7%, one was circa 8% of the overall global market share. But the value added, the knitwear, the woven and the made-ups, we were not even close to 1.5%. Now and here our textile is largely cotton based, it's 70-30 in favor of cotton. But when I looked at the export market, it's completely the opposite. It's 70-30 in favor of synthetics. And we are not, and it's 70% the value added. So we are producing, we have a market share which is not the largest market share in the export market, and we are not catering to what the client wants. And the reason why I wanted to share this with you is that textile is an export designated sector, and consequently any incentives which are offered to its 5 export designated sectors, electricity and gas, they are there to improve the productivity, well, to improve the production, so to speak, of these sectors and also of textile. But the government has to be careful in assigning these incentives and understanding where it wants the sector to go. Right now, I think there is some work needs to be done. I've also done research, asked questions, how our export-oriented sectors have been designated, but I'm still trying to find an answer, on that. Another very interesting study that, we did at the Planning Commission was we compared Pakistan to Bangladesh. This is, again, a couple of years ago. And, there was a paper which was shared with me of various enablers and global rankings, which are considered as enablers for the outputs. For example, rule of law, administration for requirement for businesses, incidence of corruption, government effectiveness, macro stability, innovation capacity, transport infrastructure, utility infrastructure, time to start up a business, so on and so forth. So all these indices from various well-recognized global reports. In all of them, when this is 1920, when we compared Bangladesh to Pakistan, I think out of 7 out of 10, Pakistan was ahead of Bangladesh. But when we looked at the output, which was the GDP number, the GDP growth, the export number, per capita number, Pakistan was far, far behind Bangladesh. So it was a bit of a paradox for us that here we had some enablers which were showing that Pakistan actually didn't fare badly vis-a-vis Bangladesh, but in the outputs, Bangladesh was miles ahead of Pakistan. So, on further consideration, what we found out was, and I would like to share this with you. What we found out was that Bangladesh had an uninterrupted single-party rule for quite a while, at least since 2019. Law and order situation. It had an export-oriented industrialization. It had industrial productivity which was better than Pakistan, and the force was better trained. It had used its LDC status very well, especially when it comes to ready-made garments, which are at least 81 or 82% of their overall exports. They had no major issues on their tax rebates. Here in our country, we have had, bouts of, we have had periods where the tax rebate to the exporter has been done rather efficiently, and then we have had, it's been a blotchy sort of an experience for exporters. Perhaps Umair can enunciate more on that when he speaks. The special economic zones are better managed than us. And last but not the least, the entire country and their association, especially the garment association, the ready-made garment association, they are extremely focused on improving the image of their country, of branding Bangladesh as a destination, go-to destination. Productivity and investment. Recently, in 2022, the Planning Commission collaborated with PIDE, and we got hold of confidential data of 1,320 companies from the Security Exchange Commission of Pakistan, each company's 10 years or 11 years audited financials. And what we did was we sifted those 21 companies in 61 sectors. And for each company, I requested the economists at Pakistan Institute of Development Economics to help calculate the total factor productivity of each of the company, and then we did an analysis, bottom-up analysis for that. This was one of a kind study because something like, studies have been done in the past on productivity, but I think to this granularity perhaps I haven't come across. So what we found out I'll just give a summary. We bifurcated these 61 sectors, which included 1,321 companies across high total factor productivity, which was 3% or more, 0 to 2.9%, which was medium, and then less than 0%. What we found out was that oriented sectors were either, most of them were either close to 0 or negative in total factor productivity, and those sectors which were provided subsidy were negative. So I think the point what I'm trying to make is that when we give subsidies, we ought to be extremely careful, because it does not help us become productive. And if we are not productive, we will not be able to compete at the international level. And to me, personally to me, if we have an inefficient SOE asking for monies from our budget for in perpetuity, and if we have a private sector entity which is not productive and asking for subsidies for perpetuity, then there's not much of a difference between the two in my mind, because it's a drag on public resources. Then investment, we have worked with Board of Investment on this. All investment to me is very important, and it's welcome. But I think in Pakistan, we have typically gotten or seen investment which focuses on what we call market-seeking investment, which comes to capture our demand, onshore demand. I think what we ought to be looking at is how we attract efficiency-seeking investments. And for that, some of the things that I continue to share with you will obviously come in handy. Finally, on foreign direct investment and global integration, and some of the points that I've mentioned obviously help in this. Export market diversification, product diversification, you must have heard, they're all very important. But I think the single most important thing that, some efforts have been made in the past, but I think nothing close to what ought to be done, is that our image in the world is really what, it does not do justice to Pakistan, and there is a lot of daylight between what Pakistan really is and what the image of Pakistan is. There have been efforts like Emerging Pakistan to improve the image and branding of the country, but I think a lot of effort needs to go in there. On FDI, I think I would like to share the example of Vietnam. Now, when I was developing with, in collaboration with Ministry of Industries, we developed a national master productivity plan for Pakistan. It's been finalized, and it's been developed by Asian Productivity Organization and Korean Development Institute. The organization and the entity who has developed the master plan for Bangladesh, productivity plan for Bangladesh, and it's the same entity who has developed the productivity plan for Vietnam. So when I was going through the productivity plan for Vietnam, I realized that they had an exponential growth in their exports from 2004-05 to 2020. I think that graph is etched in my memory. But the interesting part was that when they started to bifurcate the contribution of exports each year from organic growth, local companies or companies who are coming from abroad, 70 to 75% of the increase in export every year was coming from international companies who had invested in Vietnam. And there is a logical reason for that. It is when we bring in foreign direct investment, it is not only the hard dollars and cash which is coming in, it is your marketing channels are coming in, your access to various countries is coming in, your skill HR is also coming in. So these things, along with hard cash, which are extremely difficult to develop, especially marketing and selling your product in the international market takes a lot of time. All those things are brought in when an international company comes and invests in Pakistan. In this, in foreign direct investment, I have a couple of thoughts, and I also borrowed some thoughts from how China escaped the poverty trap. I read that book, and I'm quite impressed by it. So just 1 minute, this is the last one. In China, foreign direct investment was not only the role of the board of investment. Each division or ministry was actually assigned an foreign direct or investment target. I think Pakistan should be looking towards that. Also, what China did was that they made their bureaucracy agents of the government, where every bureaucrat or government official was incentivized, was given a commission based on the investment that he or she would generate. I know it's a concept which perhaps may not be amenable to us right now, but I think if done well and if monitored well, it can really help us overcome a lot of our hurdles, especially the bureaucratic and administrative hurdles that we feel today, which hopefully we can do away to improve the overall private sector environment and usher in investment. So I'll just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Asim. So there you go, but the government viewpoint, and there's been a bit of mea culpa in the government viewpoint, so we accept that. But now, very interestingly, so far we've been playing Hamlet without the Prince of Denmark. So let's bring in the Prince of Denmark, which is the private sector. After all, the exports have to be increased by the private sector. Value chain has to be formed by the private sector. We've also heard from Asim that the private sector is falling short of productivity. We also know the private sector doesn't invest anything in Pakistan. I value Asim and the government suggestion we'll get foreign direct investment, but I remember a long time ago, Japanese investor asked Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. I asked my Pakistani friend, he invests? He say he no invest. He knows something I don't know. So that's the problem. So, Umar Saab, why are you falling short? Why are you not in the global value chain? Why are you not exporting? And what is this about liquidity? I don't buy this about liquidity. There is ample liquidity in the market, you're just not tapping it. So please give us the mea culpa from the private sector.
Thank you. Okay, so I think before I delve into what my points are, I think it's important to address what you said. It's partly true. I do admit that the private sector has fallen short. So right off the bat, I think it's true. But is it because of our own, incompetence, or is it also because the government policies haven't been aiding us? So, it's a chicken or the egg debate, because I've been in business since 10 years now, and government policies have changed so volatilely that, I'm completely not sure that if I plan a project or if I work on exports, what will the outcome be a year from now, let alone 10 years or 20 years, where manufacturing and export businesses are supposed to, plan long term. So I think with that, I'll just start with the points I compiled. So obviously this is a topic which I can go on and on about, because as a manufacturer and an exporter and someone who's the worst hit by recent events, political and economic, I'll start just by saying, or maybe going into the positive side of things. First of all, I think Pakistan has tremendous potential for manufacturing. We have a young population, and we have a large pool of engineers. So, and cross talents like industrial, mechanical, electrical. Secondly, we have a lot of established industries that we can build upon. So if you actually look, we have the auto industry, textile, home appliances, we have pharmaceutical, construction, sporting goods, leather, surgical instruments, etc., etc. And these are actually doing quite well in terms of local production, local manufacturing. So I think this is a huge opportunity, because we have a huge population, and we can leverage this local demand to launch us into exports. And I'll give an example of tiles. So you might know recently, or actually 10 years before, there were only 2 or 3 companies who used to produce tiles in Pakistan, right? As soon as the government made imports a bit more difficult and incentivized local manufacturing, 6 or 7 local, foreign Chinese companies came in and they set up plants. The first was Time, then there was Oriel and Gunny, etc., etc. So there is a huge potential there. Third, Chinese manufacturers now are looking to outsource their labor-intensive processes and industries. So I'll give you an example. One of our vendors was in Pakistan last week, and we were just comparing notes about the different labor costs there, different energy input costs. And I was shocked to learn, they told me that they are working on the whole group actually is working, it's a huge group, they have 7 offices, they're one of the largest magnet producers. They are working on 4% net profit. And when I asked them why, so the reply was that it's just so competitive. We can't keep up with regional competitors because our basic labor, unskilled labor, is $600. Our basic input electricity is 20 cents. It's actually quite high. So to add to what Mr. Asim said, I mean, we're always complaining about high electricity costs. I think even now, with the proposed tariff hikes, it will be around 20 cents or maybe 21 cents. So these are the positives. The challenge is, obviously, the first is inconsistent government policies and indifference of our policymakers towards our problems, that is manufacturers and exporters. So I'll give you a very personal example. When I came into business in 2012, I was very focused on making my company an export leader, and I worked very hard towards it. So the first 3 or 4 years were spent in process upgradation. I used to go to China like 3-4 times a year. I worked on R&D, process improvement, HR improvement. And when I finally was ready to export, the government at the time, this was between 14 or 15, I think, decided that they would stop all sort of payments, which is, so our industry usually gets sales tax refunds, duty drawbacks, etc., etc. So they stopped all payments to the exporting industry. And as a result, we became uncompetitive. Our interest in exporting was significantly less. So, after that government tenure passed, we started focusing on local industry or local market, started adding products, diversifying. The next government came in and they offered good subsidies. They increased our DLTL, or I shouldn't say subsidy because we are a company we are an industry which doesn't get subsidies, but we get, paybacks like sales tax refunds or DLTL. They started paying back all those refunds and also cleared the previous government's balance. So again, as an industry, we worked towards exports. We took out delegations to different countries. We were very motivated to export, and we did increase our export by around 50% as an industry. And then 22 happened, and I think the rest is history. Everyone knows what result exports had on that. So, it's a very tricky subject when you talk about government policies, because on the one hand, there's this government view that maybe manufacturers are inefficient and they're taking too many subsidies. But on the other, industries like us, we pay peak commercial tariffs when it comes to electricity or gas inputs, or even other inputs like all the taxation we pay in full, all imports, duties we pay in full at the port, and then we claim our refunds. So second, the challenge is that setting up a new manufacturing facility is extremely difficult. There's no industrial area available. SCCs actually cater to a very specific kind of industry. So if you look into their criteria, it's not easy to meet. And even if as an exporter I get approved by the SCC board, what about my vendors? So I'll need packaging materials, I'll need die casted, plastic molded, etc., etc. I need about 10 to 15 items, and they won't qualify. So where will they go? And similarly, the rules are very difficult for manufacturing. So if I buy land other than SCZ or industrial area, the rules are so ridiculous. So I'll give you an example. If I get an electricity connection from WABDA, I have to pay for all the cables and the transformers, right? but when I get them installed, they're WAPDA's property. And if I get an upgrade, so if I go from like a half a megawatt to a megawatt, I pay for the upgrade, but the old equipment goes to WAPDA. So it's almost as if they've kept these rules to discourage investment. Then third challenge is there's a lot of red tape and bureaucratic hurdle for manufacturers. So interestingly enough, I was in Sialkot at a meeting organized by the BOI, and one of the largest exporters, Forward Sports, were there. And they were telling me or us their experience with the Sambrayal dry port. So he told me, the director of Forward Sports, it took him 9 months just to get construction materials into the dry port. And they were building a new factory for exports. So, you know, where we've been hearing all these talks about export facilitation and all that. And this Sambrayal dry port is a public-private partnership, you know, fueled by the Sialkot businessmen. And it took them 9 months, and this is the largest manufacturer and exporter in the sporting goods category. So imagine if he's having to deal with this, what does the SME do, right? So, you know, I could go on and on about this bureaucratic hurdles, but I think everyone knows how our businesses are treated, especially the SMEs. Yeah.
The problems of the private sector within. For example, I'll ask you a simple question. I was asked this the other day. How many non-family owned businesses are there in Pakistan? And I had to come up with the answer, none. There is no business like Apple or Google or IBM or something, because all businesses are family run. Second question I was asked, how many professionally run businesses there are? I had to again say no, only multinationals, right? Third question I was asked, for example, how many businesses actually are listed in the stock exchange? Again, very few, and they're all family run. So I think, and fourth question I was asked, and I did write a book on this too, what is the state of R&D? And I went to Sialkot, and I'm going to Gujarat next week. There is no R&D in Pakistani business. Why not?
Okay, I'll answer your fourth question first. So it depends on industry to industry. Obviously, you can't generalize. R&D in our industry is, I would say it's quite good. So I'll give you an example. This inverter fan, you might have heard of it, the inverter technology. It was introduced 5 years before by a Chinese company, 5 or 6 years. So the first or second year, by the second year, they had sold a large amount of fans in Pakistan. And as soon as we caught on, in 2 years, we had completely reverse engineered and locally indigenized the technology. So now we are manufacturing the motors from the stator to even the copper wire ourselves. So I'd invite you to come over to Gujarat, and I'll be more than happy to show you. Could you repeat the first 3 questions, please, regarding
family-owned businesses?
Yeah.
All of your family-owned businesses?
Yeah, I mean family.
All of you not professional? All of you not listed in the stock exchange? Is that how China escaped the poverty trap says? That the business should be insular, and you said that the moment we get a subsidy, we start working more. Okay, last question, where are your brand names? You have no brand names in Pakistan.
Brand names. Okay, so first...
Forward Sport has no brand name.
Well, I think I have a brand name, so I would disagree. But regarding your first point, so as a professional, if you want to open a new company, the bankruptcy laws in Pakistan, so, legal protection to investors, there are so many hindrances to opening and running a business. The reason why there's so many family-run businesses because it's become an art. Because it's not just about, you can't just focus on your businesses. There are so many other hindrances, a lot of them created by the government. So if I wanted to open a new business, I probably wouldn't without the support of my family and their experience. So these things do matter at the end of the day.
Thank you. Zafar Saab, then, you're firmly on the spot. It's all the government's fault. Even Asim says it's the government fault. Member private sector. Private sector says it's the government fault. We all say it's the government fault. What are you guys doing at the Planning Commission?
Thank you. I don't think it is only government to blame because all manufacturing process is done by individuals, private sector. Government only just do policy work, but as my friend mentioned...
Sorry, what about the sludge What about these guys, what they're saying, the permissions and the lack of return of, I'll come to Arfa on that, what do you call that? Refunds that you keep in your hands. I mean, the crazy tax policy that goes, as Asim said, that sort of goes all over the place. Sometimes you tax my foot, sometimes you tax my head, sometimes you tax my hand. What about that?
Yes, you're right. Pakistan do not have a tax policy. I think the consistency of the policies, because we are consistently doing bad taxing for many, many years. So taxation is done on arbitrary manner through a finance bill, just increase sale tax from 17 to 18%.
What about the regulation and the footprint of the government?
Yes, government regulation is a great hurdle on the investment side. And in PIDE you have done sludge series, and you have just estimated cost of sludge. Because of these processes, I think this is a rotten governance system. And this governance system, I think everybody want to get hold of policy making. And this bureaucratic trap, I think we have to change this governance model. And I think from tomorrow we have a governance forum to reform the governance system as well. Because this governance system is not helping. It is rather just impairing all the things. And in this, I think the most important problem is with the government. Government is not taking its role of becoming a facilitator or regulator. We have a stupid kind of regulations, and it is at all tiers of the government. So government has to define, I think the best way is to undo all regulation, then just decide what to regulate and how to regulate, what sort of regulation is the minimum level. There are certain areas where government should be very vigilant, but there are some areas which in the private sector which can be done without involving government. So the permission system, you have mentioned about refunds. I think Bangladesh, Asim Sahab has mentioned about Bangladesh is a very good refund system, automatic refund system. When we were negotiating SBA in 2008, automated refund system was part of it. And now we are in 2013 after 15 years.
We do these things only to get a loan. We forget them after we get the loan.
Oh yes, it was part of the
so
2008.
That's the problem. Got $400 million in the FPR. We are buying cars, we're doing all kinds of things, but that's just loan. But Arfa Bibi, let's come to you. This is the right time. You lived in China, you graduated from China, you worked with Justin Lin. Please sum up this discussion for us. Is China socialist? Are we socialist? Is China bureaucratic? Are we bureaucratic? How does China make policy better?
That's a tricky one, by the way. China is very bureaucratic, I must say, and so are we actually. I would like to.
The question is, who is more bureaucratic?
That's a relative thing then. That's a relative question. So when you say more, then you have to come up with some barometer to check who is more socialist. We definitely are not socialist, but we are quite bureaucratic. However, in Pakistan, bureaucracy is not as strong as it is in China, I must say. But I would like to build up or take up a few points that have already been discussed here. Umair has discussed a few points, and so has Mr. Zafar. Taxation policy, Pakistan's taxation policy is not as bad as it is generally portrayed. The point is that our tax base is very narrow. So we keep on squeezing the people who are already in the existing tax net. Sales tax refunds are also automated in Pakistan now, like Bangladesh, maybe not as efficient as in Bangladesh, but still, we have now this fast, like the software fast, by which sales tax refunds are given. But I would like to comment more on the economic zones that Umair had been talking about. So there are some good things as well, which we have achieved, and specifically in recent past, if we see, there are 9 economic zones under CPEC. 3 were prioritized in earlier JCC meetings: Rashikai, Dhabaji, and Allama Iqbal in Faisalabad. Dhabaji is just inaugurated last week in Tata, Sindh. Rashikai I just visited again last week, and I couldn't go to Dhabaji inauguration because I was in Rashikai, and I was very impressed by seeing Rashikai. And actually Rashikai model is, to me, the best model that we can have for SCZs. It's a partnership between KP government and CRBC, a Chinese company, and there are 78 companies already in Rashikai, not operational, but they have registered, and roads are there. Phase 1 is on its way. Allama Iqbal in Faisalabad, Punjab, the 3rd priority SCZ under CPEC. It became operational, I think, a couple of years or more than a couple of years back. BOI in Islamabad has digitalized all the information of economic zones.
Can I just kind of liven it up a little?
Sorry?
Have we ever seen an evaluation of any industrial estate, SEZ, all this alphabet? Have we ever seen an evaluation?
I actually did evaluation myself of
please
Allama
tell us.
Iqbal, and I'm right now I'm just presenting the rosy picture because so much had been said against the government. So I just wanted to share with everyone that it's not as bad. So BOI has digitalized, provincial governments are now active, their SEZ committees are working, their SEZ authorities are working. STZ are now established. One of the STZ I visited by Air Force, they have utilized these premises of old airport in Islamabad. It's amazing. So these are the good things. And now let me touch upon the weaker points. That yes, these SCZs have yet not been able to attract any FDI from China, no industrial relocation from China, which is a big indicator that gaps are there and serious gaps are there.
Don't forget,
But
local
then-
investment is also 13% of GDP.
Sorry?
Local investment is 13% of GDP. Chinese
Precisely,
investment is what?
precisely.
40% of GDP? So I think we have to really figure out.
We have
Bangladesh
to.
investment
We
is
have to.
25% of GDP.
Because look at the incentive package that we are offering in these SCZs. Umair just talked about the lengthy procedures. I have tons and tons of stories of these lengthy bureaucratic procedures in these SCZs. Look at the lack of one window operation. Domestic investor or foreign investor, they come and they keep on shuttling from one place to another. However, as I said, there are so many good things which have happened. So we are on our way. These paradigm shifts in economy, in investment, they do not occur overnight. We cannot expect miraculous overnight transformations. We are on our way. It's just 1 decade of CPEC. 1 decade in the history of countries is not a very big period. So if in 1 decade we are on our way, 3 of our zones are already functional, yes, yet we are not there. We have to see Bangladesh model. We have to see China model. In China, they started off with 4 pilot SCZs, and now there are thousands and thousands of economic zones at the national level, at the provincial level, at the city level, in public sector, in private sector, public-private partnership, single sector economic zones, multiple sector economic zones. There are multiple models operative in China. So we are learning. Although that our learning is a little slow, we have to make efforts to make the learning more quick.
Wonderful. 10 years is not enough, ladies and gentlemen. 75 years is not enough. I don't know how long we'll take, but let's turn to the part of value chain. Can you tell us, is Pakistani industry anywhere in the global value chain? You mentioned cars, for example. Where are we in the car value chain situation? Where are we in the localization situation? You mentioned fans. How many fans do we export?
Back in 2010, we were exporting around 40 million, and then US dollars, and million US dollars, yes.
That's an average bonus in Citibank, right? So, I mean, please, You have to do better than that, no?
Yeah, so I'm just giving you a little context. So after 2000, between 13 to 18, just to give you an idea of how important these policies are, when the refunds stopped, it dropped to $21 million. Then in a span of 2 to 3 years, it came back up to 31. This was probably 22. And last year it's down to about 21 or 22 again. So I mean, if at the end of the day, if I'm building capacity, if I'm investing in my export capacity. So where do you fit in the global value chain? Where do you fit the global value chain? In the global value chain, so China, just to give you an overview, the total export figures or total consumption of electric fans is 6 billion. That is for the household use. $6 billion, and for the industrial use, it's $24 billion. 90% of that is exported from China. The second largest exporter does about $150 million. So in that context, we're not that far behind, but we are rapidly catching up, and we are rapidly trying to, increase our export capacity. But the problem is, this is a very competitive and a high labor-intensive, low-value addition product. And it's very competitive, very price competitive. And branding in this particular product, it's mostly controlled by OEMs or large buyers like Walmart, like Coach for Turkey. So in this particular product, there isn't much room for branding. You mentioned the auto industry. I do believe the auto industry is probably the most developed in Pakistan. So auto, we might not be able to do fully assembled cars, but we can do auto parts. So I heard that India is doing like $8 to $10 billion in auto parts. It's a huge figure, and we're not even close. I think we're less than $10 million. $10 million? I'm not sure. Yeah, 10 million. 10 million. Yeah, but
10 million, which is like, what? 3-month bonus in Citibank? For one person? So, Asim sir, please tell me. You put this together. Industry is not working. Government wants to, as they say in Punjabi, thibbi lagana, that they want to trip up everybody. Tax department doesn't know what it's doing. So, as member private sector, please knit this together for me. What's the story coming out of here? Why should we point to China or Bangladesh? Who are we learning from? Since we are not learning at all. Let me also ask you a very simple question. Last weekend, I saw this glorious match, the Wimbledon. I'm sure you saw it too. A young 20-year-old guy beat the old man Djokovic. He had no government support, but he beat him by working bloody hard. Is this happening in Pakistan?
To knit it together, it's a difficult one to knit it together. But I think when I shared my thoughts here, I don't necessarily see them in black and white or good or bad. I see them as areas where we can perhaps improve. And I think
we're trying to make Pakistan grow.
Yes. And I think, but I still feel the same. Yeah. So I think sometimes we lack intent. And sometimes when things move and shuffle too much on the political spectrum, on the policy spectrum, it has an overall, a political economy effect on our administration. Things don't tend to flow through the way they ought to, and this is what at least I've seen in the last 4.5 years here. So the thoughts and the ideas I feel are there. There are some very, very smart people, contrary to what some of the people in the private sector may think, that people on the public side may not be as smart. I mean, I can now vouch that there are some very, very smart people on the public side. They know their stuff, and they're very sharp. And I can say this, and they are easily comparable to people that I worked with at City as well in terms of sharpness. But I think sometimes the intent is lacking, and sometimes the ownership and the accountability is lacking. And I think that sort of culture has taken flight in our country. A lot has to do with the culture as well. You know, like we have culture in a company, in the banking sector, or in an FMCG sector. The culture has also evolved here, which may not have gone in the right direction. And that culture, which has just essentially percolated over many decades and has imbued our private sector, is that they have to be in bed with the public sector to extract incentives, and that's their business. And unfortunately, that's not their business. And that's what the productivity study that we did kind of showed. It showed the elite capture, the anecdotal elite capture that we talked about actually in numbers. So I think we can still do it. If you work hard. Look, Hamza Khan, he won the Junior Asian Champion. Our Pakistan A team beat India, I think yesterday it was, in Asia Cup. So we can do it if we work hard. But there was something very interesting that I would like to share with you. I'm keen on squash, and I was playing squash with a coach in one of the clubs here, and I asked him if he could beat another ranked player in the club. And he smirked at me. He said, "Are you joking or kidding with me?" And I said, "No, I'm not kidding with you. Can you beat him?" He said, "I was in the top 20 in the world in the early 90s. So I was a little taken aback, the player that I was playing and all. And so I started chatting with him, and I asked him that he said he used to play with, Jan Sher. He was on the team with all those guys. And I said, what led to our decline in squash? There can be many things, administrative and management and so on and so forth. But one thing, it was very interesting that he shared with me that I'd never thought about. And I think it's also applicable to cricket as well. He said, in the 70s and 80s, we had a very simple game. We would play straight shots. The innovation in our game, in our shot making, started to lag behind, and other countries did better than us. Consequently, we started to lag behind. And I felt that the same concept could be applicable to our reverse swing. It was an innovation in cricket, in terms of sports I'm talking. And I think that innovation is it's not there. With all due respect to Umair, I'm just talking. I don't want to be specific here, but I've interacted with the private sector, but the spark and the innovation that I wanted to see is not there. It is that they want to have connections with the public sector. They want to get the work done, maybe get an SRO, and that's the end of the story, and their business is done. So if I can just try to, I don't know if that answers your question.
Just to add to what you...
Survey on the engineering industry in Pakistan. Got a big book coming out on it. And I keep asking one simple question, which I think, please, Umair, answer it for me. Why don't Pakistani businesses grow? In Gujarat, how many fan makers do you have? You probably got 100. I went to Sialkot, there are about 300-400 very, very tiny businesses operating for 100 years. And the average size of the Sialkot business, $10-20 million, which is like peanuts, right? The question is, our businesses don't grow. And when we asked a specific question in our questionnaire in Gujarat, and in all the engineering triangle, we got a very simple answer. We don't want to grow. We are satisfied so long as I can keep my business within my family. My son can inherit it. That's all I want. I don't want to play Elon Musk. I don't want to play Ambani. If that's the mindset, where are we going to go, Umair?
I completely agree with you. And, unfortunately, this is a mindset. This is a mindset that you're absolutely right. The second is the ones who do want to grow, the biggest reason I would think is not professionalizing. And professionalizing in Pakistan is a very tricky subject because, as you know, the quality of HR, especially in second, third tier cities, is not that good. And people aren't willing to relocate to smaller cities, the good quality HR. So it's a very tricky subject and a very lengthy subject. But I do agree to what Asim Saab has said, that you should be fair. I think businesses, manufacturing especially, has lagged behind. We haven't innovated. As I mentioned, when I went to China first in 2013, I was actually shocked at the way we were doing business. I mean, we were so far behind, just in our technology, in our quality control, in our style of management. But we innovated, and the fan industry, I would argue, is actually one of the better ones. I'm not saying that we are up there. We're competing with the world, but we're
40 million.
Yeah.
From 100 producers.
Yeah, but the second largest is 150 million. So if you have to beat China, then you give us the same infrastructure, the same, facilitation that the government offers. So it's not possible.
That I don't like. Look, let's face it, the informal sector is growing very rapidly. When I look at these small restaurants and retail shops, etc., they're doing very well. Real estate is doing very well.
Yeah.
Now, if you guys are not competing, I have to ask a question. I'm sorry, but I have to ask a question. Why is it you tell me the industry is doing very well? And one thing I'm really not very fond of hearing anymore, Pakistan has a lot of potential. Pakistan has a lot of talent. If it has a lot of potential and talent, it should show up in the top line, in GDP growth, investment. We are not investing more than 13.5%. How are we growing? I don't understand. Zafar Saab, Arfa Bibi, please bataiye. Is industry in the business of real estate or in the business of industry? Zafar Saab, is SEZ and these industrial estates real estate or is it industry? I'll put a second problem here, second issue, observation here. I went to 5 cities recently in Punjab. I asked a simple question at the chambers. How many of you export? And they said only 1 or 2. So if chambers in Multan, Faisalabad, etc. have 2 or 3 exporters and the rest are all domestic players, and then if your Allama Iqbal SEZ has no exporter, please tell me.
First of all, I think you have mentioned about growth in informality. You can see we have a classic example in the formal sector like Tehzeeb Bakers. They have produced very good products, but not expanded much in Pakistan. On the other hand, in the informal sector, Bhat Kadai, you can see Bhat Kadai from northern area to Rahim Yar Khan everywhere. So it expanded because informality allowed them to grow. But in the formal sector, Tehzeeb Baker cannot grow. And it is all about mindset because we don't move our businesses out of the family. So expansion, Tehzeeb Baker don't want to expand. And around the world, I think logistic firms, they help in exporting Tehzeeb type of products. But in Pakistan, there are not much infrastructure available for these logistic firms. So that's why they are not able to grow. And Pakistani firms, innovation, I think Pakistan in export basket, if you can see, Pakistan has the lowest number of products added during the last 20 years, even less than Sri Lanka or Bangladesh. So because lack of innovation and the firms which are capable to move abroad or export, they are not exporting much because they have a fear from growing from informality to the formal sector, because becoming an exporter, you need to expand. And you need to expand, you have to, then one contract enforcement system or court system. If we have, Omer and I have an agreement of joint venture, then the contract enforcement becomes difficult. So because of that fear, if I have a very excellent idea and want to partner with Omer, Omer will be reluctant to just sign an agreement with me.
Initially into the basket too. Great. Arfa Bibi, you round it off, then we take the audience questions.
You mentioned these SEZs as real estate business, and you mentioned Allama Iqbal. Yes, I agree with you. Allama Iqbal, which was the first SEZ under CPEC, which became operative, was completely on, it was on real estate model, and I actually wrote a paper on that. In SEZ's township versus housing model, because that was completely a housing model. But then we learned from our mistakes. Rashtrakai is a completely different model, as I just mentioned. It is not at all a housing model, not at all a real estate model. And Allama Iqbal, which now is operative on a certain design, which was, in my opinion, completely a real estate housing model, now there are, the rules were already there, but were not completely followed. And now the rules which are, if rules are implemented properly and businesses, they have to become operational within 6 months, they have to start the construction within 6 months, become operational in 2 years, then it would cease to be a housing model. So, all depends upon the implementation. But the new models in Thabajig and Rashtrakai are not housing model, not real estate models. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. We have a very big proposition here. We learn. Second big proposition we have is that we don't follow rules. But I'll turn it over to the audience. Folks, questions, go ahead. Raise your hands. I hope there's a mic around somewhere to float it around. Anybody? Boliye, boliye. Where's the mic? Nobody has a mic? माइक नहीं है तो यहाँ सामने आ जाएं यार, इधर आ जाए अगर माइक नहीं है तो। हाँ जी, आपकी आवाज़ मेरे ख्याल सबको नहीं आ रही। माइक ऑन है कि नहीं? इधर आ जाए यार, इस पे आ जाए। हाँ, बेटर। जरा पास कर लें, जरा पास कर।
मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ प्लानिंग, एज एन एग्रीकल्चर, I have a question about agriculture industry. Pakistan is an agricultural country, and we have the potential and diversity for export of agricultural commodities, and there are no big taxes on agriculture export. So why the industrialists are reluctant to invest in agriculture?
But then that's not agriculture.
जी सर,
आप एग्रीकल्चर की बात कर रहे हैं ना?
Yes. So
if
because there
industrialists
is
invest in agriculture, will it be agriculture anymore? Will it be industry?
There are because we have sufficient food for us. So, but we have the diversity that can be explored.
Member Energy,
to
please.
Export.
बोलिए जी, बोलिए। चलें, go ahead, you can jump in. पहले आसिम कर ले, then you.
I think if you look at our cash crops, I think most of them are produced to feed our industry. I'm not sure, I won't totally agree with this thought that the industrialists are not doing backward integration. They are, and there are examples of that. There is Jahangir Tareen Saab, who has done backward integration. Mia Mansha Saab has also done backward integration. There are other groups as well who are doing backward integration, where the inputs are coming from the agriculture sector. So for them, it's not really, when they look at this, they don't really look at this as agriculture, but really forward or backward linkages. And they don't want to rely on, because our agriculture, our demographics and our land base is so fragmented. It's 10 acres or 12 acres. It's very different. I come from an agriculture background. I've done agriculture with my own hands in Rahim Yar Khan for 2.5 years. So I understand it very well. And I understand the mindset of a farmer also very well. For an industrialist, it is pure forward or backward linkages for an industry, feeding its industry. And I'm also, I have a considered view that any crop that a farmer produces which feeds an industry will never get as prosperous as he wants to be, because the industry will always somehow or the other cap its profits. And in a sector or a business which has its profits capped, you should never do it.
Let me build up on that quickly. Whether it's an individual or a company, the income is clearly bifurcated into industrial income and agricultural income, and taxation policy is different for both. And agriculture income, by the way, is taxed at the provincial level. Yes, agricultural income is not taxed by FBR, but agricultural income tax is there at a quite a nominal rate though.
Yeah, so as an industrialist who has a passion for agriculture, For me, the biggest impediment in investing in agriculture, because I actually thought about this, I wanted to go into agriculture, it's HR. So you see, in my organization, I'm managing full-time. And when I do another business, I expect to have good HR to manage and to run the business. And this applies to all businesses, not just, so when you're working at a level, when you're diversifying, you have 2 or 3 businesses, you do expect professional management to come in and run your business, right? So that has been the biggest impediment to not just agriculture, to any sort of growth. Because I feel that the quality of HR is so poor, and I was shocked when I was doing interviews for engineers at their knowledge, they weren't able to answer basic theoretical questions. So at the end of the day, for me, that's a very personal answer. I don't know if it's true. The quality of HR here, if I decide to go into farming, I expect graduates from agriculture universities who know their stuff, and I can manage and I can invest in it. So I won't be doing it full time. I'll be doing my industry full time, and then I'll invest in it as an entrepreneur.
Good point. G, go ahead.
Very quickly, I think, while framing your question, you, I think, laid a bit of emphasis on taxation, and Madam addressed that as well. But I think do keep in mind that for them, it's not that just because the agriculture is, let's say, not taxed at the federal level, let's say, therefore we should, get into it or not get into it. For them, it's a proposition of synergies. It's a proposition of supply chain for their industry where the value addition is taking place. And if it makes sense to them, business-wise, they'll do it. Tax, yes, it is important from a business perspective, but it's one part of your overall financial model.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Very quick thing before we go to the second question. एक तो ये अपना sorry जी पहले तो इन्होंने कहा कि जी he said कि Pakistan has a lot of potential and great talent, and then we hear on the other side that he can't find HR. So I think there's big contradiction. On the other side, we got 300 universities and he can't find HR. So we have a lot of introspection to do, and we have a lot of questions to ask. Finally, sir, before you go, Nadeem Saab, let me just quickly make an observation which just came on my watch. Hazards of having a smartwatch, which is dirt cheap, but nevertheless. I just got a message saying, this weekend, 2 movies, Barbie and Oppenheimer, I urge you to see Oppenheimer, 2 movies made $235 million on a weekend. And our annual exports of fans, and which was the second industry?
40 million.
एक और दूसरी इंडस्ट्री आपने 10 मिलियन वाली कौन सी कही थी? ऑटो पार्ट्स एंड फैंस. ऑटो पार्ट्स को हम पाल रहे हैं 75 साल से. $50 million. So Nadeem sir, please put perspective on it.
Yes. So thank you for the opportunity. So I'm Nadeem Javed from Planning Commission. So my question is very fundamental. Let's dig a little bit deeper. What's the problem, with us? There is a whole set of literature in strategizing in emerging markets. And that shows that investors generally, they seek emerging markets and they invest in those markets because there are institutional voids. And it's very easy to exploit those voids and make abnormal profits in these economies. And on the other side, if you look at Pakistan, so we have, I think, the kind of studies show that in every sector we have a lot of potential. You look at our investment policy, it's one of the very, you could say, the generous investment policies while you compare it with the other peer economies in the region or anywhere across the world. So then we, this SEZs and EPZs, this kind of things were missing, but yet we are working on them as well. But despite having all this and having all these institutional voids, which Mr. Asim has very eloquently pointed out in the first round of discussion, neither we are able to attract efficiency seeking FDI, and that is, I think that's the first one. And then the second one is always, that's going to come for the market seeking, but it's unfortunately inverse in our country. So, but when I see my country and compare it with most of the other African countries, or where these, Chinese relocations are happening, and these are happening, and these will continue to happen. Okay, so unfortunately, ये जो चोर सिपाही का खेल हमने 4 साल खेला, that created a lot of problem for us, and it would take a lot of years to come back to the track again. But during this time, most of this business has moved to the locations which are even worse than us. But I always try to figure it out, that what is worst in us as compared to these African countries, that they are able to attract this investment, but we are not. So, let's slightly dig deeper and try to find out that what's the right answer for this, and what we should do to attract these greenfield investments in our country, keeping in view that we have the market. So thank you. Yes, please.
There are like multiple factors and there can be multiple replies to this question. It's a big question, but I would touch upon one thing. When China didn't have the capacity many decades back, in Suzhou, when they had to establish an economic zone, they didn't have the capital, they didn't have the technical know-how. They relied on Singapore. They invited Singapore to come and establish the economic zone. And then they took it up from Singapore later on when they had the capacity. In Africa, in many of the African countries now, currently, as a researcher, I always say, go and see the model. You look at the model, the relocating industry in African countries, the mining industry, the mining companies, consortiums going to Congo, going to other African countries. The African countries do not have the relevant skill, the relevant capital, the relevant know-how. So they give their land, they give the whatever they have to Chinese. They trust the moving in consortiums and SOEs. Does Pakistan do that? No, we do not do that. We do not trust any of these foreign investors. We do not give them the free hand to utilize our facility. We become insecure and we immediately start saying, oh, they are going to make us their colony. No, they haven't made any colony in Africa. They haven't made colonies in other BRI countries. Why would they make Pakistan their colony? This is a big mindset problem in Pakistan. Thank you.
Yep, so just to give you an idea about what you were mentioning, why aren't we? So last week at the meeting with Forward Sports, so, Sialkot, you can fault us for having less exports and not doing enough, but I think Sialkot is very competitive. They're a very progressive industry, and they're doing $3 billion of exports. So for a very small city, it's a lot. So Forward Sports, their CEO came in and he said that I've been trying to get in this Chinese company for a JV. So that was the first part of the problem, that he invested in the Samrayal dry port, or sorry, not the dry port, the Samrayal export processing zone, right? And it took him almost a year just to get construction materials into the factory. Number two, when he tried to do the JV, it took him, I think, more than a year to get the visas for his technical engineers, because they didn't get security clearance. And the list is quite long, I won't bore you with the details, but his final conclusion was they moved the factory to Egypt. And he said that when I went to Egypt, even though it's a military controlled area, they were very efficient. When I told them I wanted to invest, it was very smooth. When I wanted to purchase land, open a new company, etc., they didn't do it within months, they did it within days. So why would I invest in Pakistan? And that's the question you have to ask. Why would a local investor invest in Pakistan? We aren't talking about foreigners here. Someone who lives in Pakistan, who has roots, who is patriotic. At the end of the day, we would like Pakistan's export to grow, but not at the detriment of our own companies. So someone who is doing $75 million of exports, who's working with Adidas, who's a very progressive company. I mean, you can ask questions of auto part manufacturers and fans, but I think they are quite immune to all of this. They are quite progressive. So if he is going through all of this, I mean, it just goes to show what the government actually is doing, or how actually they are facilitating exporters. And the fact that they moved to Egypt is quite depressing. And right now, the sentiment among manufacturers and exporters is so pessimistic. They're so cynical of the government policies. I think that is our biggest challenge. So if you restore even an iota of that confidence, I can assure you, you'll get much more industries than you have had new housing societies in the past 2 or 3 years. You'll have so much investment. So that's a big problem.
Sir, can I just, sir, I think the answer is, it's just not one answer or one point to this. It can have multiple factors. Some of them maybe I tried to address, but obviously it's a very, very large topic. But here, sir, listening to your question, I sort of recall this phrase which sort of goes like this: glass china and trust is easily broken but not easily mended. So, the concept of trust on which, my banking career was all built, the moment you lose that, I think this is the most difficult thing to get back. Our entire banking system, at least, when I used to work at Citi, our relationships would work on trust. And when that is ruptured for whatever reason, one political party comes in, the other goes out, policies are changed, the outside investor gets, the investor gets a bloody nose. At the end of the day, no one really cares about his or her investment, and it goes down the drain. That trust is shattered in Pakistan, not in a political party, but in Pakistan. The second thing I think I would like to share here, that in 2019 I went to China and I met CRBC, and Rashakai was coming up, there was work going on, and they asked for 3 things. I was working on the SCZ incentives, sir, at that time, and you may know that some of the initial work, research was actually done at the Planning Commission and handed over to BOI for this. They said we want 3 things in order of priority. I clearly remember this: security, infrastructure, incentives, in order of priority. This was coming from our client. So I think that's also something that we should keep in mind. The other thing, I think, again, coming back to the lay of the land, and I think this was also mentioned why we don't invest. At the end of the day, a businessman is there to make money. It's very difficult for a businessman. The businessman ought to grow his or her line of business. That's what the businessman ought to do. But if you see in some other area where you can make quadruple profits with hardly taking any risk, then businessmen are just purely looking at numbers. And we have a case, an elephant in the room, in the form of real estate, which has offered us. I think almost every second or third person here would have invested in real estate, and we all know that. As our economy, and it's the real estate has thrived and it has generated billionaires in our economy. We really have to also look what we want out of our economy and where we want our economy to go. The onus is on the private sector, and the onus is also on the public sector.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. This is Shiraz Rafiq.
I would also like to request the Chinese participants here to please also, join the discussion if you can. Go ahead.
Sir, as you have concluded that there is a problem of rule of law over here, because mostly people who are supposed to implement the strategies are reluctant to follow the rules. So if there is no rule of law, so even though, would you consider yourself to invest in an economy where there is no rule of law? Second thing is, if you are not interested, or if you want to invest in a country where rule of law is not available, so how can you basically expect foreign direct investors to invest in a country? And the third thing is, are you willing to implement rule of law in real sense to promote economy? Even CPEC won't do anything good within Pakistan. If government officials are reluctant to implement or are failed to basically ensure meritocracy during the implementation as well as in the government departments. Thank you, sir.
Before you answer that, please let me just quickly say the rule of law or all these issues are not affecting Coke and Pepsi. Wherever I go to the farthest corner of Pakistan, Coke and Pepsi are there. McDonald's is expanding like mad. McDonald's is up to 100 branches now. KFC is growing. So I think we make too much of it. Companies are growing in Pakistan. Informal sector, you look at Al Fatah, Batakrai, all these companies are growing. Imtiaz Supermarket. So question goes back to Umair. It's the industrialists who are not growing. The rest are growing. Real estate is growing.
No, but to be fair, is Coke and Pepsi an exporting industry? Do they have exporting customers who are placing their bets on Pakistan for consistent supply chain? So the biggest challenge, as Asim Saab also pointed out, is you have to be a reliable trade partner, or at least appear to be a reliable trade partner. If your customer thinks that maybe a year from now, even if the country exists or not, is a question mark. So it's a big challenge for you to sell your product. And when you work with organized industry, their biggest challenge is, or their biggest worry is that they won't get their, supply on time. So it's a very good question about the rule of law. And as a business owner, this is something you constantly think about, like the incident in Sialkot. It has a lot of deep rooted issues. It's not just one incident. The lynching in Sialkot, yeah. Lynching incident.
What incident? Can you please explain that to us? Because we should like to know what it is. I don't know what it is.
So I think a year or two ago, a Sri Lankan manager was lynched by a mob in Sialkot, right? And I know as a manufacturer that behind this, obviously there is that aspect.
Why is it not a management issue, but a rule of law issue? Where was management of that company, the family-based management who want to hold the company close to them, where were they? For example, if you think about Coke and Pepsi, it happened, they'll handle it. McDonald's, for example, I've gone to McDonald's and offered the guy behind the counter a bribe to give me a free meal. He won't give it, no matter what I give him.
Yeah, but I'm not sure you can translate that into security, right? So the problem with rule of law is when you have a population which is so deviating from rule of law, when might is right, and we experience...
Sorry to intervene again. Yeah. I see industrialists roaming around in big Porsches and BMWs with $3 or $4 behind them. So you have muscle. Why can't you manage your own factories?
Not every industrialist has muscles. And that's a very niche type of industrialist, I might add. And so that's a very good question because, I've had incidents in my factory and I've seen how local law enforcement is just not interested. Unless they have political pressure, there is no rule of law unless, you have a sifarish. So that is a huge problem, you're right, and this is something I've struggled with.
Thank you. My name is Umair and I belongs to Peshawar, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and here I am representing a business community and I am a businessman as well. I would like to add my opinion and comment on the worthy panel discussion that we have, that the worthy panel shared with us that Pakistan has a very good potential in our national reserves, natural resources and cheap labor and special economic zones. But we have seen that we have no productivity in Pakistan, we have no value addition seen in our industry, and we have seen unskilled labor. This cheap labor with mostly researchers and panelists have discussed about, this is useless in the industrial sector and it has no demand. In this current artificial intelligence and highly competitive market and world. So we have special economic zones, but we don't have industries in it. So my question is from government officials that from the last 75 years, we have seen that we have a huge force of highly distinguished bureaucrats in our country. But as far as the progress is concerned, what is their progress, what are their deliverables, and what as compared to their perks and privileges they are enjoying in our
let the
country.
panelists answer that. Boliye ji.
I think the production is not only the government's fault. It is the private sector, it is the education sector, it is the judiciary. A combination of everybody has to play its part. What we have done during the last 75 years is, I think, every business prospered on the incentive regime. So-called incentive given to textile sector. Most of our depreciation is done in the textile because of textile sector want more exports. But I think that's a, and on the other hand, on the incentive side, you can see we issue SROs. SROs, 86% of these SROs are firm specific, not industry specific. They are given to one fertilizer unit, not another, and they are given to one industry, not the another in any industry. So if you are giving incentive to a whole industry, everybody is free to utilize it, and this is the basis which discourages investment. And private sector is also not taking much risk because, as Asim Sahab has mentioned, in property, everybody is investing in property because it has safe returns, tax-free returns, and our big businesses like Nishat, and they are moving towards this real estate business. So I think we have to discourage this sort of investment because for ordinary people, if you have 10, 15 million rupees, you have to buy a piece of land instead of investing in an innovative idea. And this type of irritant exists in the society, and they are discouraging investment. So that's why we are not able to. We have a lot of potential, as Nadeem Sahab has mentioned. We have resources, but only thing is we cannot put all the resources into a value chain to generate value added. And that's our problem. It may be our skill importing system. It is something to do with the innovation system. The innovation system is not creating right kind of incentive for innovative ideas.
जी, anybody else quickly? किसके पास माइक है? बोलिए जिसके पास माइक है.
This is me, Dr. C. Malik. I have two quick questions. One is, when is energy sector going to be part of 18th Amendment? And I'm asking that question because my second question.
यार ये topic पे जरा रहे. Let's not go off topic.
नहीं, I'm coming to the industry side. See, we have this cotton industry, and that's pretty much the only thing we export. And in China and I think some other countries, they actually give free electricity to some of the key industries. So is Punjab ever going to be capable of giving free electricity to cotton industry?
जरा अपने आप को introduce भी करा दें.
मैं Dr. Simi, I did my PhD in environmental economics, Quarry University.
ये जरा पीछे भी माइक ले जाए, पीछे लोग खड़े हो रहे हैं.
Yeah, I can comment on that. I don't think Punjab will ever be supplying free electricity to cotton industry, because if cotton industry is important, there are so many other industries which are important. We right now are, the government is trying to ensure a continuous supply of electricity to businesses, what to talk about free electricity. And the incentive package cannot be this, as you mentioned, free supply. So my personal view is that no, it will not be feasible. This kind of subsidy is not feasible for a country like Pakistan. I can give 1,001 examples. Okay, that's a little too much. A few examples from CPEC projects where subsidy was discussed at all levels, that Pakistan, a country like, a government like Pakistan's government with very limited resources, can't give any subsidy across the board. It has to be, what do you call it, any subsidy, I don't know, conditional subsidy. There's a word for this which has skipped my mind. So it cannot be given across the board. So this kind of facility cannot be given to any single sector. That's my opinion.
Yes, I think Pakistan has to reduce incentives rather than giving more incentive or put more burden on the government. So it should be a competition based. So ensure competition. This is the role of the government, not more than that.
But if you ever do consider, then you should keep the fan industry in mind.
Okay, ji, go ahead, ji. Last two questions, then we close.
Assalamu alaikum.
Ji.
Thank you, panelists. My name is Umar Sufyan Ahmed. I belongs to South Punjab, and I am a PhD scholar in the subject of economics. I would like to take as insight that in our side, like Bahawalpur, we have is SMEs, small medium enterprises, where chunri wala kapda, very renowned. In my DG Khan, Norozi, are traditional shoes that have at every occasion you can wear it, and especially the mangoes of Multan. When DHA stepped into Multan, about 19,000 mango trees were cut down for the DHA. We damage our environment. We have cut down the trees. The mango production cut down. Yeah, my question is that neither privileges have been given to the producer. When mango producer he get much more revenue from the DHA and not getting revenue from the mangoes, then what will happen? The Norozi.
That's life, ji. That's life.
Can I,
thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I sort of touched upon the answer to this earlier of real estate versus other sectors, but just coming to this, because incidentally you mentioned about DHA and mangoes. Incidentally, a few days ago, the ex-DC of Multan was in my office, and he mentioned exactly this, that DHA was expanding and there was this, he had to form a report and mangoes were cut. And there is, the story that he told me was something different. I'm not sure whether, it's not right or wrong here, but I'm just sharing with you the other side. Apparently, when the report was made and he investigated, what he found out was that the mango trees which were cut had reached their age of maturity of, I think, 40 or 40 plus years. Consequently, they were not producing as much, due to which they were cut. This is the other side of the story which he shared with me, incidentally, since you mentioned.
Last question, anybody who's there? Boliye ji. Wo bol rahe?
I'm Ishtiaq, student of economics. So my question is from private sector and the public sector both. Like we have seen many SMEs policies, industries policies, and sometimes like there are priority sectors, but like some things are feasible and some things are not. If we go to the FTA, we sign like on the things for China, which we were producing, and we lose our industry to those products. So my question is, what are the base of research behind all those policy decisions and the innovations? Like, if you looked into the leather industry, we knew that the word is like.
Basically, आपका सवाल ये है, where is the research?
Yes.
बताइए जी. Do we have any research in this country at all? I keep saying watch Oppenheimer. Please, everybody should see Oppenheimer. There's research everywhere in the world, even real estate. So where is the research in this country? Please tell me.
Yeah, so research, I think it touches upon a very interesting topic, or a very important topic, is academia and industry linkage. Unfortunately, it's very poor in Pakistan. And, fault lies on both ends. I must admit that maybe
I don't accept the academia fault.
You don't accept we can debate about that later. But, it's true that unfortunately, because of this, the lack of this linkage, there is very little research, and we're mostly doing reverse engineering when it comes to industry. So
इसमें मैं ये point कहूँगी, the gentleman mentioned about FTA. When we had our CPEC, China-Pakistan FTA phase 2 approved, there was a considerable research done by Ministry of Commerce. They came up with a list of 313 tariff lines where they wanted to have zero duty. But then, and CPFTA Phase 2 was approved after quite some struggle. But then later on, nothing was done to build up on that research, and I am not sure whether we did any tangible export to China in those 313 tariff lines. So research initially was there.
I think we have done a study in the Planning Commission about these 313 products. Out of these, Pakistan does not even produce 124 products. So there is no question of export if we are not producing. So I think they were not well researched. That can be done simply by using micro data, and we have done in the Planning Commission that 124 products we don't even produce.
I think this area of research and development a lot needs to be desired here. R&D inherently as a subject is an expensive proposition for the private sector. You throw a lot of money and you're not sure when your prototype or your product is going to be developed, whether that product you develop will be commercialized and what the market feedback is going to be, it becomes profitable or not. I think here the government should try to support the private sector as much as possible, not to take away from the fact maybe they can be blended finance here, but just putting the entire onus on the private sector to fund this may be a little too much. Perhaps the government should step in. In terms of research on our policies, again something which ought to be desired. I think we as a nation, we're just not too fond of reading. This is what I have seen a lot of papers and documents and books come, but let's be honest with ourselves. I mean, they also come to my office. Okay, let me be honest with myself. I'm not able to go through all of them. Some very, very good, I did go through your book, okay, but I'm not able to go through all of them. And we as a nation, I've observed, generally speaking, there are exceptions. We don't get into the nitty-gritty of things. We'll read the summary, we'll read the first few pages and maybe the conclusion, and that's about it. I think a lot needs to be desired. There are stakeholder consultations. Research does happen, secondary research does happen, but I think in terms of primary research, perhaps we need a bit more. But even if that does happen, some of the points that I've mentioned in my earlier speech, they just have to be absorbed. If the absorption factor in the system is low, no matter how good a research you've done, it's just going to be there in the system and not be absorbed. I think that is also something that you should keep in mind.
Thank you very much, folks. I think we've... last question, Kareem.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. My name is Afran Qasim and I am Chief in Planning Division. Private sector development is actually removing the obstacles. It's actually the ease of doing business. And if you see the new regulation for ease of doing business, the methodology prepared by the World Bank for more than 140 countries, the main focus is on quality of regulation. So how smart your regulations are. Unfortunately, in Pakistan, our regulations are not based on risk-based approaches. Our regulations are not time-bound. They don't have any incentive or fine for doer and not. These are based on actually on don'ts, not on do's. So regulator is actually the Thanedar, not the facilitator. So is any initiative or any institution working to make these regulations smart so that we may have less roadblocks for the investors, for industry and for the private sector? Thank you.
I would, Secretary Board of Investment wasn't able to join, but I would really hope that the Board of Investment is working on it because that's something.
Yeah, I can comment on that. पहली बात तो ये कि मुझे ज़रा मेरी क्लैरिटी के लिए ये बताएं कि क्या वर्ल्ड बैंक ने ईज़ ऑफ डूइंग बिजनेस के नया क्राइटेरिया दे दिया है?
ये था ease of doing business, फिर ये B हुआ business enabling environment, and now it is B ready के नाम से.
BRMI, yeah. So ease of doing business is halted by World Bank because of certain problems since 2020, and the new indicators are yet not declared by World Bank. Yes, the other thing is PRMI, and BOI has worked on that. Provinces are also working on that. This is the Gulleton approach, and
what is PRMI?
Pakistan Regulatory Modernization Initiative.
What is PRMI?
Pakistan Regulatory Modernization Initiative.
Who's doing it?
Board of
BOI.
No, which donor? Sorry, which donor?
Sorry.
Which donor?
Which donor?
हाँ,
World Bank.
World Bank ना, तो World Bank का है ना, ये क्या कह रहे हैं BOI कर रही है?
नहीं,
sorry.
ज़ाहिर है World Bank ने तो
Because see,
the
real issue is research is always done by a donor. Things are always done by donors. तो ये बताइए ना हमें हाँ.
So World Bank is now promoting this Gulleton
So
approach.
World Bank is doing it while World Bank was discredited by Paul Romer, a Nobel Prize winner. He's doing business was trash. Now World Bank is going to do that. Mashallah.
PRMI, they are doing it, and all the provinces have been tasked by BOI, the federal BOI, and provincial BOIs are also working on that. All the departments
World Bank कर रहा है, वो भी World Bank कर रहा है.
World Bank तो BOI को कर रहा है ना, तो
नहीं, वो जो provincial कर रहा है कौन कर रहा है?
Sorry?
I've heard provincial वाले जो हैं वो defeat कर रहा है through Ernst and Young.
नहीं, can I just
provincial departments are making a list of all the regulations that they have
through Ernst and Young, funded by DFID.
Okay.
So we should. I mean, I'm a researcher.
Right.
I like to cite the right person. हम ये जो छुप के करते हैं ना काम, कहीं DFID कर रहा है, हम तो नहीं कर रहे हैं ना?
Okay, because I'm not sure about the funding part. I know the implementation part, because for instance in Punjab Board of Punjab PITB, Punjab IT Board, they have developed a business portal, and all the provinces, all the departments, the provincial departments are asked to come up with the list of their regulations, ordinances, acts, all the legal documents, and then there is one filter. After passing through one filter, a few of these regulations will be deleted, and this is the Gulleton approach, and at the end of the day then a few will be left behind, and that will facilitate the businesses. So the work is underway, and BOI is taking the lead in that.
Well, I think I just want to make a short comment, if you could. I think private sector development, while this is an important thing, but this is just, in my mind, a rather small yet important part of the overall ecosystem. Private sector development is a much larger, canvas. If you look at the competitiveness index of World Economic Forum, and I have said this many times at the Planning Commission while we are doing our CDWP, the entire PSDP portfolio ought to be focusing on sectors which improve your competitiveness. Those 12 sectors, they have the macroeconomic scenario, they have your infrastructure, they have your health, they have your markets, they have your ICT, so on and so forth. All these are sectors which are sort of defined in a silo in our PSD. For me, PSDP ought to be focused on competitiveness. So private sector development, how our sectors are structured. I did a fertilizer study, and I also shared it with PIDE, and they were gracious enough. And I showed how, as we go from agriculture, from fertilizer to agriculture, what different levels in terms of pricing we have to increase to make the farmer whole, and so on and so forth, and that there is an elite capture there. These are the sort of anomalies that are also an extremely important part. I mentioned earlier about the textile, how the turf, if you actually go into, my sense is that if you look at the turf disbursements, they will probably be focused on spinning and weaving, which is not what the world primarily wants. So private sector development is a much larger canvas, but at the same time this is important, and I believe Board of Investment is working on it. But even if we get a new framework to deal. I think is new framework, getting a new framework the answer? No. It's the mindset and the willingness to change. Nadeem Saab once mentioned we have tons of policies which have never been updated. I remember there was a long list that he had mentioned, and he said we should take this up, and that was, I think, a great initiative. I wish we have time to do that. If we make policies which are static, the world fortunately is not static, and we have to move with the times.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I think we should now close the session. I think we can go on all night, all day. We do this every night at dinner. We do this every night on TV. Unfortunately, there are no answers because we're every day in a firefighting mode. We are in a rush. But as Asim Saab says, we don't like to read, we don't like to think. As Rafiq Saab says, we have no HR. And as both the BOI and the planning are arguing, what research we do is very questionable, and at the same time, the donors lead us. So it's a mess. I'm so glad, Nadeem Javed Sahab, you offered us an opportunity. I think the Planning Commission should do a lot more such activities. We need a hell of a lot of debate in this country. We have no narrative, we have no thought process, and that's what's bringing us down. I think if we discuss China, and if Chinese were here participating, they would tell you they have a lot of thought, a lot of debate. They're hardworking, they follow rules, they read, they understand. I've been on training in China and many times. They know their business. Thank you.
Haque to please present the mementos to our esteemed panelists. Please, sir. Please.
Thank you, folks. All the best. Thank you.
Huh? Okay. इसको निकालो ना खोल के, please. कौन? इसको नहीं, वो दूसरा। ये तो लोग ही नहीं है ना, दोनों नहीं है। उसके ऊपर कौन है? प्लीज आप चले जाएं सर। अब वो नहीं चाह रहे तो रहने दो, रहने दो। रख दो। वो नहीं ना, विलिंग नहीं है।
अनाउंस करो ना।
नहीं, चलो ठीक है। वो विलिंग ही नहीं है, उन्होंने कह दिया बैठे हुए। So we are going to have 15 to 20 minutes break. Then we request you to join us for dinner at 8:45. Yeah.